Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on our webinar today. I am really excited for the discussion that we're going to have today. We've got an incredible panel that I'm really excited to have. Now, before we get into it, just a quick invitation to you. So we've been doing these webinars since 2020. We started these off during the beginning part of the pandemic as a way to stay connected, and it's really grown into a community that I'm so proud to be a part of. And one of the fun things that has taken place in these webinars is the chat has become a really important place for people to share and exchange ideas. And I hope today is no exception. One reminder within the chat, some of you, for some reason, the Zoom app will default your chat settings so that you're sharing comments with hosts and panelists. And if it says you're sharing your comment only to hosts and panelists, then only 3 of us can, or 4 of us can see your comment. So if you're willing, adjust that over so that you're, it says right above where you type in your message, there's a little drop down arrow. You can change that and it will say to everyone. Make that adjustment, and then just to check it, make sure it's functioning well. After you've adjusted it so you're sharing with everyone, what I want everybody that's on to do is just share an emoji in the chat that describes how your day is going so far. So throw an emoji in the chat that lets us know how your day describes how your day is going so far. Perfect. Oh, it brings me so much delight. I'm so glad that we can communicate with emojis now. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for doing that, and again, thank you for joining us today. Our webinar, really excited for this one. Our webinar is around supporting LGBTQ+ students in our schools. And it's a really important conversation, and we've got a really powerhouse panel that I'm excited to introduce right now, and then we'll jump right into it. So by way of introduction, here's the panel we have joining us. We will start. We have Matthew Berry. Matthew has served as a school counselor, MTSS facilitator, and director of alternative education, and is currently the coordinator of school counseling for one of the largest school districts in Missouri. Matthew is a 2022 American School Counselor Association finalist for National School Counselor of the Year, no big deal, and is the 2020 Missouri School Counselor of the Year. He served as the first chair of the Missouri School Counselor Association from 2019 to 2021, can often be found speaking at regional and national conferences on building equitable systems of support and on fully implementing school counseling programs. On social media, he's best known as the One Wild Counselor. Name was created to describe his passion and ability to wildly advocate for the academic and social and emotional needs of all students. Welcome, Matthew. Thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Next, we have Tara Kierstead. Tara is in her 11th year of being a school counselor in Maine and has been advocating for the rights of LGBTQIA+ people for 2 decades. In 2018, she was awarded the Maine LGBTQA Youth Educator of the Year Award. In 2019, she was named Maine School Counselor of the Year and also received the University of Southern Maine's Alumni Achievement Award. She especially loves to present on how to best support transgender and gender expansive students. Welcome, Tara. Thrilled to have you.
Thanks. Super thrilled to be here in freezing cold Maine today. Hopefully everyone else is warmer than I am.
And then last but certainly not least, we have Sean Jeffers. Sean is the co-founder and director of leadership development for youth at the Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. Youth at the Center advocates Youth at the Center advances opportunities for children, youth, and young adults to be seen, heard, and valued as the next generation of leaders in our community. He has nearly 15 years of experience in youth leadership development and facilitating diversity, equity, and inclusion programs through his professional roles as Director for Public Allies Cincinnati and Director of Education at the Center for Holocaust and Humanity Education. As a volunteer, Sean serves as the lead trainer for GLSEN Greater Cincinnati, where he partners with schools and community organizations to create safe spaces for all youth. Sean serves on several boards, including Housing Opportunities Made Equal, HOME of Greater Cincinnati, the Region's Fair Housing Authority, and Camp Quest, Ohio. Welcome, Sean. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone.
And then I am Jason Johnson. I'm the lucky individual that gets to moderate these webinars. It's become one of the absolute joys of my life. Really feel fortunate to be a part of it. My background is I come from public ed, where I was a school psychologist. And then for the last 7 years, I've been with the YTRI organization. We're the organization that hosts these webinars. We provide training and resources to help individuals build resilience, to learn the skills and the sources of resilience. We've been around for about 20 years, and I get the opportunity to work with educators and mental health professionals throughout the country through conferences, training, etc. And just couldn't be prouder to be a part of this community. So with that, I would love to just jump right into it, get things going. I was wondering if maybe our panel could tell us a little bit about your current role, what you've been working on, focusing on the last little while. Let's go, Matthew, Sean, Tara.
Great. Thank you, Jason. So currently I'm coordinator of counseling for Rockwood School District. I have about 70 school counselors, K through 12, that I work with. This is my first year in this district, and really my focus of my work that I'm looking at, and in terms of just really it feeds really well with what this work is. But I'm examining our current system and practices to really ensure that they're supportive and also predictable to meet the academic and social emotional and future kind of success ready needs of all of our students. So every student, every day. That's so important to me, to ensure that we're doing what we need to meet those needs. And Jason mentioned, I definitely do a lot of keynoting and speaking to other associations, and that's one of those pieces that is so critical. And so really looking at our vulnerable population of students, and just asking that question: do they have access to learning opportunities to our schools, and what can our communities and our schools, our classrooms provide to ensure that that's happening? So that's really the focus of my work entirely, but also this year is just really assessing that to make sure that we're in the right space to meet those needs.
Awesome, thank you. Sean.
Good afternoon, everybody. So again, I'm Sean Jeffers with Youth at the Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I'd say one of the major ways we engage young people is we have a youth-led group called Young Not Silent. Young people chose that name when we were launching about 7-8 years ago, and it was really intentional about how we flip on its head that old adage of children should be seen and not heard. And so we really look for ways for how do we have young people to be seen, heard, and valued. We do an annual youth summit in Cincinnati called Young Not Silent. And every year we have a trifold board, kind of like one of those old science fair boards that we take out to different events. And we ask young people to just put on a Post-it note, like, what's something you're not silent about? And they lift up, and we get all sorts of things that they want to talk about. And a lot of them are things oftentimes adults don't always want to talk about. And so recognizing that if we have young people and and equipped facilitators who can work with young people, it can really help them be informed and get information so that they can share those with their peers. So that's like my professional role with Youth at the Center. And then also as a volunteer, work with GLSEN Greater Cincinnati. And we're one of about 40 chapters across the country, where I do training and professional development and youth engagement through GLSEN, really trying to support LGBTQ+ students in schools and community.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Tara.
Hey, so yeah, as a school counselor, I do all of the school counselor things that you would expect a school counselor to be doing. I really focus on social emotional at my middle school, high school. But in terms of what we're talking about today, specifically, my big thing is policy change or policy period. If your school doesn't have one, how to get one, how to make one, how to create one, where to find the resources for that. So in a lot of my presentations, like you read about in my introduction, thank you for that. It's basically a lot of that stuff. That's where it started, was how are we making sure this is equitable for everyone? And a lot of how to fix your existing policies. So basically that's where my bread and butter is in working with schools. Definitely I have a transgender 101 presentation and things like that, but we always get down to the nitty gritty about like, what can you actually do? And that is a big part of that. So that's what I'm kind of constantly evolving, working on with my district and other districts across the country.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All of your responses reminded me of something that I should probably offer as a disclaimer. We're scheduled to be together for about an hour today. I know we will not be able to get into full detail on everything we want to. I'm really hoping this is essentially a part one of many future discussions. But also for those that have asked, it is being recorded, and we will send out a follow-up email with some of the links that are most likely shared today. I know sometimes in these information can start to come fast and furious. And so, write down, screen capture what you can, and then we'll do our best to set you up to be able to follow up on some of the great stuff you're going to hear as well. So with that, let's jump right into it. I want to start off with a discussion about, based on your experience, what do you think it is that LGBTQ plus students need most when it comes to support? What do these kiddos need the most? Within school, outside of school, however you want to approach that question. Let's go, Sean, Tara, and then Matthew.
So one of the things I think that's really important to make a distinction about is, although we talk about the LGBTQ plus community as a collective, I think it's important to sometimes differentiate based on different identities and different experiences what our young folks need. So I happen to identify as gay. I came out as gay 20 plus years ago now. And I think when I came out, I largely needed support and validation. And I recognize, as I've continued on my journey and learned and worked with more young people, as I engage more with trans, non-binary, gender expansive young folks, that they need the support and validation as well. Those are definitely key. But there's also considerations around name changes, pronoun, respecting the pronouns and names that they ask to go by. In school settings, especially, it could be around locker rooms, restrooms, dress code, different things like that. One of the things I really try to highlight as well when I do trainings with schools is to think about, especially the restroom issue, because that can sometimes be a hot button dynamic that there's, experiencing definitely in different places around the country as a potential legislation as well, is using the menu option. So if a young person is saying, like, I want to go to a restroom, give them a list of options and say, we have in our school boys' rooms, girls' rooms, maybe there's a teacher's lounge or an office, single stall restroom. Which of these 4 places do you want to go? And then having them say where they feel most comfortable. And if they say, this is the restroom I want to use, great. And now maybe student B comes along and says, I no longer feel comfortable. Yeah, the nurse's office is another location in some schools. But if a student B comes along and says, I no longer feel comfortable using the restroom that I've been using because now student A has an option to use my restroom, we give that student B the same list of options. There's a boys' room, there's a girls' room, there's a teacher's lounge, an office, a nurse's restroom. Which of these do you feel most comfortable? And if student B says, I feel most comfortable using the restroom I've always used without student A in it, that is not on the menu of options that we've given you. This isn't Burger King. You don't get to have it your way. You don't get to decide and make choices for another person, right? Like, we have to say, like, these are the choices that you have. And so once somebody has made a choice, we let them know, like, there can be other accommodations made, but one student's choice can't invalidate another student. And I think that's what we have to be really clear about, is we want to create space that all of our young people, regardless of how they identify, feel like they can show up and get what they need at school. Because there's a lot of trans and non-binary youth who just choose to not go to the bathroom for the entire 8 hours they're at school. And so typically they're also not eating and drinking and taking care of themselves. So it just doesn't really allow them to be present as a learner if they're not being able to get these other needs met that are more, critical and important, just on a basic kind of Maslow's level.
Thank you. Tara.
I definitely agree. Co-sign everything Sean said. Couldn't have said it better. I definitely want to expand upon support and advocacy because especially in schools, students need to know who they can talk to. We all like to assume that everyone has the right vocabulary and the right supportive skills to talk to a student who identifies as LGBTQ+. And that's just not always the case. And some people still aren't comfortable talking about that. And that's a whole nother issue, but we want to make sure that the kids are going to the people that are going to support them. So knowing who the adults in their space are that are trained in how to welcome students, how to answer basic questions, how to give basic resources. That's super important. GLSEN has the safe space training, absolutely free, which I love. I tend to do that as my own little mini training. Anyone can get it and anyone can get the sticker, right? And anyone can put that up and that's totally fine. You do you, if you're ready, do it. But I like to do the training in sort of small groups so I can sort of make sure everyone is on the same page. Everyone's giving the same resources. Everyone knows what the terminology is. Everyone knows how to best support the student. It's just super important. We don't want a student to come out to someone and have it not go well. I always tell staff when I do these trainings that if you are a person that someone comes out to, you are now part of their story forever. For the rest of that person's life, you are someone that they came out to and they trusted. So we want to make sure that's correct and good and people feel supported. So definitely making sure students know who to talk to. That's super important. That's probably my number one, but also in the same vein that students know what their rights are, like what Sean said with the menu. Some kids don't even know they get a menu. And that's really important that students know what their options are and what their rights are. There's a lot of different things that these kiddos are being told, and just having the clear, concise, actual resources and the best place to guide them, super duper important.
That's great. Let me see what I have to add. And so, yes, I am in the same space with both Sean and Tara. I do believe, that idea that, and not idea, but it's reality. Students need to be seen, need to be heard, need to be affirmed. That is so important when we think about students who are LGBTQ plus, and just knowing that you have a trusted adults. And so I love just expanding on thinking about who that can be. That may not be the school counselor, it may not be the social worker, right? And so that may be you. And so when it is you, how do you continue to support? I was in Morgantown, West Virginia this past week, and as I walked into the hotel, there's a big sign in this hotel where I'm at. And the first thing it said was, the city of Morgantown welcomes all people. And it listed who they welcomed. And as a gay man myself, that alone helped me, put me in a place where I felt safe. Just those messages are so important, and it just made me think, man, what does this look like if in every building, in every classroom, in every school, when a student first walks in the door, they know that they feel welcome. They can feel that, they can sense that, and they see that. So I think that those are things that are very important, and that's without anybody saying one word. And so those are the environments that I hope, and I know that students are looking forward to be able to thrive in when it comes to what learning looks like.
Awesome, thank you. So I think that's a great transition into where I want to go next, which is kind of along the lines of the how. I know we have a variety of individuals in attendance today. I know we have some long-term advocates and allies, and I also know that we have some new people that are just learning how to try to be more helpful and more supportive around this. And I'm wondering if we could kind of continue the discussion around the how, and maybe share what advice you have for where educators might start when it comes to better supporting LGBTQ plus students? A good starting point or even a good continuation point as part of that. Let's go with this one. Let's go Tara, Matthew, Sean.
Yeah, there's a ton of different ways to go with this. I definitely always recommend any sort of training you can get. Someone in the chat, Jeanette, I believe, mentioned bias, went to my point that some people think they're ready to do it and they don't realize they have a bias. Totally important to check your bias. Do the hard work. I know that sounds super cheesy and everyone always says that, but that can be as much as going to a webinar like this. This is you doing the work. This is you learning. So it can be anything like that. Start small if that's what you're comfortable with. But making sure you are best serving these students, and that's how you start with doing that. And I also think it's important to point out that there's community available for sure. These people here, as a school person, I would definitely have Sean come into my building and do a presentation. I use my resources as much as I can. It's great to have me in my building doing the talking, but having other people coming in and training your staff and training your students is super key. If you have community people, bring them in. If you have another, like if I was close in the location to Matthew, I would bring him in as another school counselor and just have him talk to my kids and talk to my staff. So it's just important to make sure, if you are an educator starting this work, to start off where you feel comfortable starting, but to use all the resources you have. And I definitely recommend, this does sound a little bit harder, but knowing what your state laws are, for sure. State laws vary. I mean, we definitely have federal laws and that can get a little confusing, but I mean, in Maine, we have a very specific Maine Human Rights Act, and that guides what I do. I've also, like when I made my policy in my district, I consulted our school attorneys, because if the school attorneys say no, I mean, that's the end of it really, because we're in a school. So knowing what your state laws are, if you are like for a school counselor, for example, reach out to your state organization and find out if there's any help for that for you. If you're a social worker, I know there's state social workers. I mean, there's state school psychology association. So just reach out and just ask the questions that you're dying to know. It's totally fine. Reach out to any of us, but don't feel like you're alone. This can be super overwhelming and super hard. And if you don't know where to start, it really is like a single action step, and it could just be reaching out to somebody.
Yeah, and now to add to that piece, really it does begin with your own learning and where you are. And I would also encourage you just to collaborate with those in your building who are currently doing the work. Like who's currently doing some of that work, and partner with them. They want partners. And so I know that, Tara, I mean, you're in your building, you're like, who could be my partner, right? And I'm looking at that in my district, and who can we collaborate with and partner up with. And that's a great way to really grow and to learn and know that, in this field, we definitely are giving grace because you're showing up to that space, and that's important. So I think those things are really important. And I think, as you learn too, I would encourage to just really think about what your lane is in terms of advocacy for these students, and what control you have. Again, policies are going to sometimes direct that, but I do believe that there's avenues that you can impact when it comes to working with this student population.
So I think Tara said, that she would be happy to have me come in as an outside trainer and train in the school. And I will say that, on the flip side, I think sometimes it's also good having somebody inside the school, because there are times where I have come in and you can tell when you look at a room, right? Like that there are certain individuals, when you are training a room of adults, some people are engaged and some people are adopting the I'm just here so I don't get fined, kind of arms crossed, kind of look, or whatever it might be. And one of the examples I try to help sometimes people see is what I call the Uno example. And so if you are familiar with the card game Uno, most of us didn't pick up the Uno box and read the rules. A friend, a family member, somebody taught us how to play Uno. And Uno official rules, they came out a couple years ago and had a tweet and a post, on social media, and said Uno's official rules are, if you do not have a card to play, you pick up one card and your turn is over. Now, we know all of us have probably played games of Uno where you have 10, 15, 20, cards, and you keep picking it up because it makes it really funny. And, that people have so many cards, but people all over social media kept saying, Uno doesn't know how to play its own game. What's wrong with Uno? Why doesn't Uno know how to play its game? And so I think we just have to be honest about the fact that sometimes a trusted person in my life, a family member, a friend, somebody taught me how to play Uno, and that's what I assume is truth. And so if I go in and do a training and someone has never met me, and I tell them information about LGBTQ plus youth, and that is in direct opposition to what they've maybe heard from family members or, mentors, religious figures, different things in their life, they're not going to listen, unfortunately, to me, even if I bring the best facts and figures and information. And so I think sometimes we have to recognize that it takes a relationship. And so there are times I can come in from the outside, being an external trainer, and share information. But if Tara or Matthew are in the building, they sometimes can have those continuing conversations. So I think Lainey asked a really great question around how do we deal with those folks who are anti-LGBTQ, and recognize that sometimes a lack of proximity to LGBTQ plus individuals would, allows us to continue to have it at arm's length or a distance and not have to think about it. And so when we work with an individual and they're able to share a personal story and talk about a family member who has come out, or, a friend or a colleague or somebody that they know, without divulging confidentiality, we don't always need to share their names, but just the experiences, just so that it gets on other folks' radars. Because I think that aspect of that cognitive dissonance can really play out, that we've understood something and this is how we believe the world works. And when somebody says, like, that's not been my perspective or that's not been my experience, it's as simple as that. We don't have to tell them they're wrong or get into an argument, but just say, like, I've got a different look on that. And I think that can hopefully open up a dialogue versus trying to convince somebody who's anti-LGBT to automatically get on our side. So I think it can, sometimes we don't always want to put in that work. And I think that's understandable if it's a thing that's going to, feel like that's a lot of work for you to lift. Understand each of us, like what our current capacity is to have some of those conversations. But I think ultimately that it's not always a no. Sometimes it can just take time for people to hear a message different than maybe what they've grown up or been experienced or exposed to their entire life.
Yeah, I don't know if I can jump in, Jason, but Sean, I love that. And I think one of the things that's so important is to really listen to student voice. And so they're the ones that really can speak to that a lot of times. My previous district, they had an initiative at the high school level. It was called You Don't Know My Story. And with that, students were giving testimonials around some of their experiences, regardless what that looked like. And they even had shirts that people sold and wore and put that up front about you don't know my story. That was so important and critical because it helped everyone to take a step back before they were making assumptions and judgments about certain situations, and really take a step and just really think about that situation and where we all come from, that we all come from different places, right? And so that we could have a little more awareness of what that looks like.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm writing notes down. This is so good. We've got so many good questions coming in, and we've got I'm writing just notes on the ideas you're sharing. I'm absolutely loving this. Let's keep the discussion going. I think this is one of the things that a lot of people are asking, and I think it relates to several of the questions that have come up in the chat. So this is a really broad question, and I'm guessing you all have a lot of ideas around this. So please be generous with your ideas here. I think people are very hungry for these, but let's maybe talk about some of the resources you would share with educators to help them out in this effort. What resources would you recommend for either starting point, people just getting started, or for people that have been doing this for a while and maybe looking for some more additional resources? Let's go Matthew, Sean, Tara.
Tara has mentioned several, and I know Sean has too. But definitely in terms of those trainings and pieces around safe space, inclusive safe space training, and the Safe Zone project. Like those are great avenues, I believe, for individuals to to really start and just to see. I also we utilize Trevor Project for a lot of pieces of work. I love the Trevor Project releases a national survey. And they released the 2022 national survey. You can look at your state and really get data too, in terms of really the need and voice around that. And I believe that's so important in terms of just educating yourself, and so you understand what that looks like. But I'm going to turn this over to Tara and Sean and let them speak a little bit.
So one thing, thank you, Matthew. But I was going to say one tool, and I'll put a copy of this as well. I can upload it to the chat for folks. But I think one important thing, just if you are somebody who is newer to the topic and you're here today, welcome. We're glad you're here. And just think, one of the things that I see a lot is folks get psyched out by the growing acronyms and the growing letters and language and don't know how to do it all. So here's the beautiful thing. We've all got these phones, generally in our pocket, that like we've got Google. So Google can tell us all the letters, and can Google things. What we really need to know are three key things. And that gender identity is how we identify in terms of our gender. So we see in our gender unicorn, it's kind of a thought bubble, how we think about ourselves in terms of gender. Gender expression, the green dots are kind of the outside. It's all the ways we present our gender. And this could be our dress, mannerisms, speech, etc. And then we have physical and emotional attraction that sometimes is around sexual orientation. But this aspect of who we're attracted to, the physical and emotional attraction, how we think about ourselves, that's all internal for our young people. So when they're coming out, when they're sharing things with us, it's just we're asking them to keep asking them to hold a lot on the inside. Similar, Tara and Matthew are counselors, and there's a lot of times where young people just don't know, like they're holding so many emotions and feelings, and they don't always know how to talk about them. Because there's so many hormones and they're growing and changing and just so much is happening. They don't always know how to talk about them. So the same way, keeping too much bottled inside, whether it's about our feelings or emotions or about who we are, how we identify, can really hurt us developmentally, and the ability to really feel like we're part of something, build connections, build relationships. So I think in a base level, just being able to understand what we might need at different levels around gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. So I think that's one resource. Just to help. So as I said earlier, when I came out as gay, which is around the physical and emotional attraction, I just needed support and validation. But for our young folks that are around gender identity, how they're identifying, sometimes there's a term that comes up, gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria is this aspect of essentially, I get either misgendered or people don't believe I am who I say I am. And that really takes a toll on me. So that gender dysphoria for young people can be really tough, that they're experiencing that. And so sometimes our inclination when we are as adults working with young people, we want to like overcompensate. So a young person will say, I'm so dumb, I'm never going to get this. And what's our natural inclination is to be like, no, you're not dumb. You're not dumb. You're the smartest kid I know. And if our overcompensation is so far away from their reality, it can be easy for a young person to think, you don't get it. You're one more person who doesn't understand me, who's not trying to understand me. You're not listening. And if I'm struggling with something, so more so being able to use our empathy approach around can help with gender dysphoria, where we're just saying, I'm really sorry you're going through that. That must be tough. And really allowing them, to just kind of name that something's happening and really allowing them to guide that conversation, as opposed to us trying to overcompensate and pick them up in a situation because they might not be ready for that. So that's some of the things I think directly around gender identity, is just that around that gender identity, there can be, just people don't believe I am who I say I am, or they don't acknowledge, they don't use the name I'm asking for. And around gender expression is how they're expressing that gender. And this gender expression currently impact all of our young people, regardless of how they identify, because so many of us get gender roles. So about what careers we're supposed to have, how we're supposed to dress, how we're supposed to look. So really recognizing gender expression, all of us can feel sometimes put in a box by the nature of that. So I think by being able to name in some simple ways, what is gender identity, gender expression, attraction looking like, how we can understand what might be needed at different steps, I think is really a helpful framework to then respond when we're working with young people so we can better engage them and meet them where they're at.
All right, so
That's fantastic. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tara.
The few that I want to hit on, we have mentioned GLSEN already, but GLSEN has a model policy that you can literally copy and paste if you need to. I tweaked it a little bit when I made the policy for our district. I combined a lot of different things to make sure it was everything that I wanted, but the GLSEN model policy is there for you, easy peasy. The GLSEN educator guides are really helpful. Definitely goes over the definitions that Sean was just talking about. But I also want to highlight two different sites. Gender Spectrum has also a lot of good graphics that you can use that are simple to put into your presentations or as handouts. Genderspectrum.net or .org, I don't recall. And then the other one is Welcoming Schools, and Welcoming Schools is through the Human Rights Commission, and that resource blew my mind when I very first found out about Welcoming Schools. It's about how to talk about these things with elementary school students, and that is often people don't want to do that. They just say, "We'll wait till they're older." They don't really understand it, and that is another part of what advocates and allies should be doing is making sure that people are aware that even if kids are little, they know what they are talking about. They might not have the terms for it, and they might just say things that they don't really understand what they're saying. But if they are coming to you and saying, if you have a student in elementary school who is just talking about they want to be a different, if they were a boy and they want to be a girl. I mean, you listen. They might not know the word for transgender or gender nonconforming or gender expansive at 7, but there's something that they want to talk to you about. So having those resources from Welcoming Schools for people specifically in elementary school is so good. It's very, very user-friendly. It's very age-appropriate. It's really kind of like the creme de la creme of resources. So I would definitely check that out. Genderspectrum.org. And then welcomingschools.org also. So they're both .org. So GLSEN, Welcoming Schools, and Gender Spectrum, I would definitely check those out if you have any sort of resources that you need. I think they're definitely good places for educators also, but really anyone that wants to work with young people.
Fantastic. I'm just trying to keep up on my notes here. Really, really good. So I want to pivot over now. I think this is a good place to do it. Lots of questions have come up around two specific things. Number one, what an educator might do, perhaps if they feel nervous about where to begin certain conversations. Maybe they don't feel supported within their school as an adult educator, or maybe they may even feel like they have antagonistic colleagues that are not supportive of this. What advice do you have for educators in that situation for where they can start? And then I'm going to throw in kind of a part B, and if you need me to repeat part B, I'll be happy to do that kind of the second or third time around. But the other question that has come up is what ideas do you have for supporting youth who may not have support from their own family, where the individuals in the school may be their kind of primary means of support right now, and that's a real serious challenge as well. For this one, let's go Matthew, Tara, Sean.
So yes, I really, it's important, I believe, for educators, teachers, counselors, staff, just to really examine and just take a step back first and just ask, who do you have? Who are your students, right? And and ask, what do they need from you? What is that they need? And examine that. I think as far as just little things, is those pieces around using inclusive language is so important. Again, just that welcoming environment is the start of that. To know that a student can feel welcomed in your school, in your classroom, in your office is so important. That's the beginning steps of all that work that we want to do. Something that I utilize is, and Sean, you mentioned a little bit about this in terms of that empathy, and really what that looks like. And so I help and work with teams on doing some empathy mapping and really asking the question around this population of students and saying, what is it that they are hearing in our building? What do they hear? What do they see? What are they thinking? What are the messages that they're receiving? And to be able to sit down, and I have a tool for that, to be able to sit down and to really have that conversation with someone, if you're a teacher, someone on your team, or someone in your grade level, and to really assess that is so important, because it really can drive you into building on to any type of crucial conversations that you may need to have, because you have a little bit more understanding there. In the counseling world, and I think also in education, I love tie these conversations back to what our mission and vision is around students, and what our goals and our actions that our plans are, and tying those conversations back to that gives a little more credence about what we're thinking about. We want every student to learn. This includes our student population that we're talking about today. And so that, for me, those things are very important in terms of helping build that. Additionally, too, there are things that you do have control over, and things that you can do in this work. And so really assessing what are those things that you can easily step into and do, but then also what are things that you can influence, and how can you ensure that you're influencing those pieces that are going to best support these students. Those would be kind of those first steps that I would be looking at.
Tara.
All right. Yeah. I love what Matthew was talking about with the vision and mission of your school or your workplace, wherever you're at. You probably have a vision and a mission. And why are you here? I mean, teachers are there to educate, and it's not like people go into education and say, I only want to educate these students. If they do, they might go to special school or something. But being in education, you want to help kids, you want to help students. And in a lot of states, depending on your laws, gender and sexuality are actually protected categories, just like race and religion and ethnicity and things like that. So a teacher can't just say, I'm not going to teach that student because they're from this country, or they practice that religion, or they're that race. Like, teachers don't get to say that. So just the same, they don't get to say, I don't want to work with a student who's trans, or I don't want to work with a kid that's gay. And that's a hard conversation to have. But if it gets to that point, I do bring that up a lot. Like, these are all protected categories and you have to teach them. And we can process that. If you still don't feel comfortable, I'll definitely process with you till the cows come home. But the bottom line is, these are your students. They're in our care, and you have to treat them just like every other student. Equality is important. Equity is important. And in terms of students who might not have support, this is definitely a question that comes up a lot. And I always bring it back to, we want to include parents and guardians as much as possible. I'm all about having the hard conversations with parents and guardians. It's not fun, but no one is in the business, and we hear this all the time when working with this population, no one is in the business of keeping things from parents and guardians, but we want to include the parents and guardians as much as we can while keeping the kids safe. And who gets to decide what safety is also a hot button issue. I get it. But if a student is in your office or in your classroom saying, please don't tell my parents and guardians that I'm gay because they will kick me out, which is a very valid concern. The data is there. The data shows us that. The data shows us the increase in violence when students come out, especially if they are coming out as transgender or non-binary or gender non-conforming. Like, the data is there, and we can have a whole nother webinar about data. Makes some people's eyes glaze over, but it's very important, especially when we're talking about this population. So including parents and guardians as much as possible, because as Sean was sort of talking about earlier with the Uno analogy, that's the same exact thing. They are getting different messages at home. They're getting different messages from basically everywhere. And school is the place where kids are supposed to be able to be themselves. And that's just bottom line. Kids are supposed to feel safe at school. Kids are supposed to be accepted at school, and they're supposed to feel like they can be themselves at school. And that's our job to help support that. And that can be for a variety of different things, where it doesn't just have to be what we're talking about today, but school is where a lot of kids, that is their only place they feel safe. And that could even be, in schools, sometimes that's the only place they're getting hot meals, or that's the only place they're getting someone who says, I care about you, I see you. And that also goes back to representation. Representation matters. I know that sounds like it could be a hashtag, because it is, but representation is important. As a white girl, I see myself in society, and I've seen myself in society my entire life. I've always known there are other white girls out there, and that's a thing, right? But if you are a student and you don't know any other kids that are gay, or you don't know any other kids that are trans, or insert any of the things we're talking about today, that's super hard. And acknowledging that these populations exist is so key, because it helps with the acceptance piece. We don't want any kids walking around hating themselves, but we do, because they don't feel like they matter. They don't feel like they're represented. They don't see themselves in society, or even in their school or in their community. So making sure that as an educator, you're still just providing what you're supposed to do as an educator. You're following your mission, your vision, you're following your laws and what the school attorneys say, you're following your policies. If you don't have one, try to make one. But it's important that these kids are being represented just like all the other kids. Representation matters. And I always go back to that when I do trainings, or when I'm talking to really basically anyone. Representation is so important, and we need to make sure that these kids are represented also.
Good stuff. Good stuff. A couple things that I think come to mind. There was one thing I just wanted to touch on. There was a message in the chat, but the chat is going fast sometimes, and I can't always find the name. But somebody had asked about, like, what if you're in school and a parent says they don't want an LGBTQ plus teacher for their student? That's not something, in my opinion, that a classroom educator should have to take on alone. That is something that they should have either their school union or their teacher union, if you are at a public school and you have access to that, or your administration should be individuals helping you out in that. I think Tara talked earlier about policy, looking at your school policies, but those things should be there. That's not something you should have to navigate on your own. And so I think that's important, is recognizing when are the things, there is things that are in our purview that we can take on, and when are the broader things where there are need for us to either escalate it and bring in administration, try and work collaboratively on finding a solution for that individual, or with that individual, whatever that might, entail. And so, but sometimes, like, there also has to be, you have to know that your administration is going to have your back, and not, that if you're in a school setting where you don't feel like you can show up and be yourself, then that's not a place that you can be your best teacher and make the relationships that are needed for students. And so I think that's sometimes too where we have to look at what's possible. And those are really tough decisions. And so I don't wish that on anybody, but just acknowledging in this environment that is something that I've talked to quite a few adults about. One other thing I think that did come up 2 years ago, I was doing a training at a school, and we were talking about, that you should have some certain policies, in your school. You should have, because oftentimes if you don't have these policies, if a student shows up or something happens, then it becomes a reactionary, versus when a policy is in place, you can be more thoughtful and intentional about navigating it. But we were just saying around, like, anti-bullying policies. So I'm in Ohio. If you remember back around 2010 or so, there was a lot of stories in the news around LGBT teens, or just other teens, middle school students who were completing suicide. And so as a result, a lot of state legislatures mandated anti-bullying policies had to be in place. In Ohio, zero guidance on what they had to look like. So most anti-bullying policies were like, bullying is bad, don't do it. That doesn't protect students, because they can't open a handbook and say there's not an enumerated list of bullying on the basis of race, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc., is not acceptable in our environment. It's not helpful for teachers, because if a student comes to a teacher and says, I'm being bullied for this, and it's not in the handbook and the teacher elevates it, then they could potentially be seen as the squeaky wheel. So one person in my training, unbeknownst to me, happened to be the union rep for this school district. And so she was like, well, while you were talking, I just looked at our student and staff handbook just to understand, do we have anything? And we don't. And she's like, and probably if we said we were going to pass an inclusive student policy, our school board's more conservative wouldn't go for it. But what we could do is, when we were doing our union renegotiation for our contract, say that teachers and staff are right now being exposed to undue risk by not having protections about supporting students. And so there's another way, if not necessarily the first way you try, of like going before the school board and asking them to pass an enumerated policy or an inclusive, ordinance, that there could be another way about like teachers could band together and say, in our contract, we need these protections, because if we raise the things that students are bringing to us and then we're punished, then that doesn't feel like a safe environment. And so I think those are the things that you can try and use. And then Amanda, we've had asked about private schools. And I think in private schools, it can be a little bit more difficult depending on how your private school is affiliated and what the availability is. But I think one thing that I try when I've done trainings at Catholic schools and private schools around Cincinnati is to talk about the power of the handoff. And the way the handoff works is, if a student comes out to me and I'm not comfortable navigating it, I might say, hey, can we go talk to Tara? I know she just did a training. Or can we go talk to Matthew? And I have that student let them know that, like, I'm going to put them in the hands of another adult who's got experience. And if that student says, okay, and we walk together and I hand them off, and now they're getting the support they need, they're not being left. Versus sometimes what happens if a student comes out to me, we're like, ooh, not it, not touching it. Then it feels like this student is just floundering or being left. So I think that's one of the things that we can, and even in private schools, say, can we have an honest conversation about who's comfortable working with this? And that some individuals might not be, and that's perfectly fine. But we want to make sure that we're finding some way to support every student in our building.
Awesome. Really, really powerful stuff. My heart is like leaping out of my chest. I'm so excited to hear what you're sharing. We're running a little bit low on time, but I want to cover one more question, and then we'll start to wrap things up. We've already alluded to it a little bit, but I'm wondering if you could maybe expand a little bit more on the power and opportunities of collaboration. I think that's come up a lot and can be a really useful resource, especially for individuals that may feel like they're on an island a little bit. Do you have any thoughts on ideas or opportunities for collaboration, how that can be helpful? Let's go Tara, Sean, Matthew.
I am all about not reinventing the wheel, if at all possible. There are tons of resources out there, definitely more than when I started 11 years ago in the field, for sure. And every year there's something else. Like what Sean was saying, Google if you're not sure. Absolutely. If you're not sure about something, reach out, collaborate with the groups I mentioned before, your state organizations, literally anybody, collaborate with us. I mean, if you go to a conference and someone says something that you're not sure about or you want to expand more about, be really cheesy and ask for their card and then contact them later. Like making connections, I'm all about it. Go to a conference. Facebook groups are not to be sort of swept under the rug. There are a lot of really good Facebook groups if you're on social media. I know social media is garbage for a lot of different reasons, but for collaboration, it can be really good. I'm in a bunch of really awesome either school counseling groups or educators for LGBTQ plus students. So reach out, join, and don't reinvent the wheel. Like when I was working on my policy, I sort of did because I wanted basically everything. But like I said, there's resources out there. Don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to, and just ask questions. Collaboration is is important. It can be awkward, especially if you're not really a big fan of talking to strangers or asking for help, which is not a lot of people's strong points, but it's very important. And just think of it as helping yourself not have to do so much legwork. So collaboration is important as much as you can do it.
One thing I would just say around collaboration is I think being thoughtful around the different roles people can play in creating change. So I live in the city of Cincinnati. So the only school district in our region where I have legal standing is the Cincinnati Public Schools. And I vote on that school board, and I can go before that school board and say, I'm a constituent, I'm a taxpayer, and here's what I want to see happen in our schools. I've spoken in front of other school boards and given, information, guidance for them to consider in policy, but they're not obligated to take it. And so I think recognizing that, when you have collaboration, when you can pull in parents, when you can pull in community members who can go speak to a school board, those things are important. And Tara just mentioned that there are some groups you can get maybe connected with in your region that you might find on social media that might be either parents or advocates for LGBTQ folks in your area. And Lizzie asked a really powerful question around what's happening. And I know, unfortunately, there's a transgender parents group in Cincinnati, and they have conversations in their group about making lists for if they have to relocate, if transphobic bills pass that prevent their child from getting medical care, they would have to choose to leave Ohio. And so that's really sad, but I think being able to know, or being able to at least know you're not alone and have another parent or another person to talk to. So I think finding at least some other parent or seeing if there's a community group, either in person or social, can be a way to just start brainstorming what are the options that are available.
Great. Tara's said it, go and listen to someone speak, reach out to them. I saw Tara speak at our national conference and initially sent her a message and reached out to her. So that's how we even we connected through that. Additionally, too, as far as that collaboration piece, I love utilizing, I found this additional tool that I've used, and it's a community collaborators asset mapping. And so, within your school, like just really finding out in terms of anything, in terms of resources and connections that your staff has or the people you're working with. And this really looks at those connections that they have, and do they speak other languages, and what are their strengths and cultural assets, and what is that? And you may find people that you can collaborate with that you didn't know that you could collaborate with. And so that's so key in terms of, we're talking about the specific population, but then any population of students. And so I know that I wouldn't be able to be doing the work that I do if I had collaborated, if I wouldn't have gone and continue to create learning opportunities for myself and continue to grow in these areas. And the purpose around that is obviously the students. And so I think really centering your work and what your work is around those students, and having those conversations with people, the people you don't know and the people that you need to know and want to know, are so important. And so those are really those steps that I encourage you to do.
Awesome. Thank you. Tara didn't know, but Tara was speaking to my my secret introvert heart there for just a minute. I'm an outgoing introvert, and I would just double down on everything that was said, and then be brave in your collaboration. Matthew, I'm gonna shout Matthew out. I reached out to Matthew. So we've been circling this topic for over a year. I reached out to Matthew last year. A friend, common friend, introduced us, and then Sean we were introduced through collaboration. A common colleague introduced us, and then Tara, believe it or not, we reached out to blindly. We saw the work Tara was doing on social media through Twitter, believe it or not, and then we reached out kind of blindly without a background, and we or without a history, and we quickly realized that this was something we felt comfortable collaborating with together. And so be brave if you're willing in that quest for collaboration, but it really can make a huge difference in helping you feel like you don't have to do this alone. And then there's I mean, we believe in PLCs as educators. There's some really good ideas that come from approaching this with multiple brains and multiple hearts going at it. So our hour's up. I wish we could keep talking. Like I said, I really do hope that this is a part one of a continued discussion. What I want to do, I want to hear from you all on one last thing. I always like to try to end on a positive note. And this has been, really positive, really great resources. But I want to ask you all directly to share something that's giving you hope right now. Share with us if you're willing. Let's go, Sean, Matthew, Tara. And as you're responding, I'm going to put up a loop of slides with contact information. This will have our panelists' contact information and as well as contact information if you want to get a hold of us as an organization. But share with us something that's giving you hope right now.
So continues to be, I think, in my work, young people. I work with adults because it pays the bills. I work with young people because it sustains me. And so I think just being able to recognize every time I get to work with young people, I come away more enriched because I think their perspectives and the way they look at the world is so refreshing and always gives me new ways, I think, to, just kind of approach this work.
Just this opportunity here definitely gives me hope for us to have these conversations. It's important that we are centering these conversations and having this conversation because there's a lot of conversations happening around this population of students right now. And so it's important that we're doing this work. And additionally, in my work too, working with those professionals, the school counselors and social workers that I work with, I know where they are, and I know that they are strong advocates in terms of these students, and that's so critical for me.
Yeah, all of the same. I am very hopeful because of people that show up for these things. It's hard out there, and the fact that people come with specific questions tells me that they want to help and they want to affect change, and that there are still people out there trying to fight the good fight and do the good work. So that is really what gives me hope for sure. So thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that all. And I hope it doesn't feel like a cop out or a cheesy answer, but similarly, the last 2 nights I have not slept well. I've been anxious about this. I'll be vulnerable with you, and I have felt such an obligation to try to do this topic justice because I care a lot about it, and I care a lot about these kiddos, as I know everybody participating does. And I was nervous coming into it, and the questions that came up throughout the chat today and the energy in the chat give me so much hope, because it is this reminder that there are really, really good people out there that are really trying to make a difference and that are willing to wrestle with and ask the difficult questions. And when people are willing to do that, that's where systems change can start to happen. That's where things can occur that can really start to protect and help out these kiddos that need it so much. So I appreciate that you all have given me a boost for the day and for the week. Any parting thoughts? Anything you didn't mention that you wish you would have before we conclude to our panelists? And if not, let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Thank you so much. Give them a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for showing up and for representing your passion around this topic so authentically and so powerfully. This was jam-packed full of incredible resources. Thank you to our attendees for showing up and bringing your A game as well and asking the important questions. We're gonna email out a recording of this. We're gonna email out, in fact, panelists, I think Tara already has, but panelists, if you want to email me any of your links that you want us to include in our follow-up email, we'll send out a list of resources as a follow-up to this. And then lastly, thank you to all of our attendees for showing up to this and to continuing this discussion, and hope to see you back at our future webinars. And like I said, I hope this is a part one of a continued discussion around this. With that, I'm going to play us out with a little bit of music.